considering the Water Resources Development Act of 2024, along with 3 bills related to the management of public buildings, a bill to name a federal courthouse in Kentucky, and reauthorization of the National Dam Safety Program at the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Before we do that, I want to take just a moment to briefly discuss each of these items. First, we'll consider the Water Resources Development Act of 2024. So, as my colleagues know, it's one of the major pieces of legislation that this committee deals with. In fact, that the Senate and the House deal with. I'm excited. This is an exciting day for us. By unanimous consent, I request that we replace the committee-drafted Water Resources Development Act on the agenda with S 4367, which is identical, which is the identical introduced text of WRDA. Without objection? Hearing no objection. The Army Corps' work protects us from floods, helps shippers navigate our water safely, and provides critical infrastructure to communities across this country of ours. As sea level rise, driven by climate change and extreme weather events, increasingly threatens our communities and their economies, the Corps' work will take on an even greater importance. We must continue to equip the agency with the tools that it needs to invest in our nation's water infrastructure and to make our communities more resilient. The Water Resource Development Act of 2024 is a critical step, big step, in the right direction. The committee received more than 1,200 WRDA requests this cycle. I'll say that again. The committee received more than 1,200 WRDA requests this cycle, impacting projects or programs in all 50 states. This bill is the product of an extensive bipartisan process to find agreement on as many of these requests as possible. And where we were not able to find agreement, we are committed to keeping the conversation going in future WRDA bills. I also want to take a moment to thank the staff on both sides of the aisle for really an incredible bipartisan effort that went into the drafting of this legislation. I particularly want to thank on Senator Capito's team, Murphy, so Libby, Dan, Dom, and Adam. I hope I'm not forgetting anybody. But if I am, forgive me. But Murphy, great job, and thanks, big thanks to you and your team. And I also want to recognize the leadership of John Kane on the majority side, and along with Linnea, Nicole, Jordan, and Courtney, our staff director. So now, next we're going to consider 3 bills that seek to improve the federal real estate disposal process. The second of these 3 bills is the FASTA Reform Act, bipartisan legislation sponsored by Senators Kelly and Kramer. In 2016, Congress passed the Federal Asset Sale and Transfer Act, also known as FASTA, which recognized the need to improve the public buildings disposal process. That law created an independent board called the Public Buildings Reform Board, whose job is to identify opportunities for the federal government to reduce its inventory of civilian real estate property. The FASTA Reform Act authorizes the Public Buildings Reform Board through 2026. It also improves the FASTA process based on lessons learned over the board's first 5 years of operation. The second of these 3 bills is sponsored by Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton of the District of Columbia. This legislation, which the House of Representatives passed by a voice vote, I think late last year, directs the General Services Administration to dispose of an historic school building in our nation's capital in Washington, D.C. The Daniel Webster School is located in downtown Washington and has been vacant since the 1980s. This legislation directs GSA to either sell the building or use it for public benefit by 2026. Making better use of this building will be a win-win for the District of Columbia economy and for the surrounding community. The third bill is the GSA's Disposal Process Tribal Parity Act, legislation that Senator Alex Padilla of California and James Langford of Oklahoma introduced earlier this year. This bill gives tribes the same opportunity that state and local governments have to access surplus federal property during the federal disposal process. Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona and Senator Creamer of North Dakota and John Hoeven, our colleague John Hoeven of North Dakota, have co-sponsored this piece of legislation. And next, we're going to consider a bill from our minority leader, Senator Mitch McConnell, to name a United States courthouse annex in London, Kentucky, after Eugene Seiler, Jr. Judge Seiler is a senior judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. He has served on the federal bench for nearly half a century. And prior to his service on the bench, he was U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Kentucky. Judge Seiler also served as U.S. Navy midshipman in 1957 and as a lieutenant in the U.S. Naval Reserve from 1958 to 1983. This retired Navy captain salutes him, along with many of you. This legislation honors Judge Seiler's distinguished career in public service. Finally, we'll consider a bill to reauthorize the National Dam Safety Program. This program is operated by the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Through this program, states, federal agencies, and other stakeholders work together to promote the establishment and maintenance of effective federal and state dam safety programs to reduce risk to human life, property, and the environment from dam-related hazards. This bill would reauthorize the program through 2029. I want to thank our members and their staffs for their hard work and partnership in advancing these important bills. We look forward to reporting each of these bills to the Senate floor with strong bipartisan support. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say, again, a huge thank you to our ranking member, Senator Capito, and her team for the wonderful collaboration and for your leadership that has brought us to this day. Senator Capito, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and today is an exciting day. Once again, we have worked together on a bipartisan basis to develop the Biennial Water Resources Development Act, or WRDA, legislation that we're considering today. I want to thank you and both of our staffs for putting together a tailored bill that authorizes critical water resource studies and projects for the Civil Works program of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. From navigation improvements to flood risk management to ecosystem restoration, the work of the Corps protects the lives and livelihoods of millions of Americans and facilitates commerce throughout this country and internationally. Since 2014, Congress has passed WRDA legislation every 2 years. So today we're taking the important step to keeping that 10-year streak alive through our bipartisan agreement to address our nation's water resources needs. I also want to recognize the leadership of the EPW Subcommittee on Transportation and Infrastructure, Chairman Mark Kelly and Ranking Member Kevin Kramer, for you and your staff's dedication to this legislation. WRDA 24 authorizes many new feasibility studies and projects as well as modifications of existing projects. The bill avoids that one-size-fits-all solutions while maintaining important flexibility for the Corps in developing projects in consultation with non-federal partners. It contains directives for the Corps to develop comprehensive implementation plans for this WRDA and prior WRDAs. This will enable the Corps to focus its energy and resources on fully implementing this WRDA and prior WRDA provisions in order to better reflect the intent of Congress and ensure the agency continues to be responsive to water resources needs. With that table setting about how WRDA is important to all of us, I would like to take a moment to highlight some of the ways this bill will directly address the needs of my home state of West Virginia. Almost 8 years ago, in June of 2016, West Virginia experienced flooding at historic levels, leading to tragic deaths and devastation. Today's bill provides support for future projects identified by the Corps Feasibility Study for flood risk management in the Kanawha River Basin. This legislation also increases the ability of the Corps to carry out smaller projects, such as emergency stream bank and shoreline protections, ecosystem restoration, and debris and obstruction removal, which are critical to many areas in our state. WRDA 24 directs the Corps to expedite feasibility studies for the Upper Guyandotte and Kanawha River Basin, as well as to expedite projects in Milton and at the Bluestone Dam in Hinton. This bill supports drinking and wastewater projects across West Virginia and authorizes the Corps to restore rivers and streams impacted by acid mine drainage in West Virginia and in our neighboring states of Ohio and Pennsylvania. Increased partnership with West Virginia University, improved education and research outreach to communities, and modernization of how the Corps assesses communities' ability to pay will improve the Corps' activities and outcomes in my state. I think every member on this committee could probably go through the litany of where we have worked with you, all the numerous projects that the chairman said were submitted to us, and I know you have a lot of good successes in this bill for your home states as well. I urge my colleagues to support WRDA 2024 and look forward to working to get our WRDA legislation into law. As the chairman mentioned, we're authorizing 5 other bills, and I'm pleased to report that the FEMA bill, the National Dam Safety Bill, and the FASTA bill, and also the naming of the courthouse by Leader McConnell to name after Sixth Circuit Senior Judge Eugene Seiler, Jr. So with that, I thank you for your teamwork and on all 6 bills we're considering today, and I'm proud that we're going to be reporting them out under your leadership.
Thank you so much. Did you say Hinton, West Virginia?
Hinton, West Virginia.
Did you say the Bluestone Dam?
Yes.
Where my sister and I learned to fish.
Where?
And with our dad 1,000,000 years ago. Great memories. And so that's
yes, we used to
very
say,
sweet.
When we wanted something, our parents would look at us and say, Hinton's up the river.
I won't mention what my parents would say.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I see that a voting quorum is present. And as we proceed, I would ask senators to hold their statements on the bill until after the voting is complete. First, I want to call up S 4367, the Water Resources Development Act of 2024, an amendment in the nature of a substitute to this legislation. It's Carper Capito number 1. The amendment makes several changes agreed to on a bipartisan basis. As the ranking member and I have agreed, I ask unanimous consent to use this amendment in the nature of a substitute as the base text for the purpose of this business meeting. Hearing no objection. The committee will now use the Carper Capito amendment in the nature of a substitute as the base text for the purpose of this committee's action. Does any senator wish to offer another amendment to this legislation? Senator Capito.
I have an amendment at the desk.
Please.
Thank you. I'd like to call up my amendment Capito number 1. My amendment would change the title of this bill to the Thomas R. Carper Water Resources Development Act of 2024. As we all know, Chairman Carper will be retiring from the Senate at the end of this session. Over the past 3.5 years that he has served as chairman, this committee has worked in a bipartisan way to exact a number of major pieces of legislation, including the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Act, the Drinking Water and Wastewater Infrastructure Act, and the Water Resources Development Act of 2022. Before Chairman Carper leaves, I am confident we will add to this list the WRDA bill, the ADVANCE Act, hopefully, and legislation reauthorizing some conservation and economic development programs. We will all have occasions to discuss the committee's achievements and to add to them, but this WRDA bill, being perhaps the last major infrastructure bill that we will mark up during this committee, I think it is fitting that it bear our chairman's name. So I hope all my colleagues will join me in supporting this amendment and in thanking Chairman Carper for his service and leadership on the committee.
That is very, very kind. Thank you very much. I accept this honor on behalf of all the folks sitting behind me and the members, Democrat and Republican, who helped make these successes possible. And it's been just such a joy working with you. Thank you so much. I said several times in the last several weeks, people have been so nice to me. And if I'd known people were going to be this nice to me, I would have quit a lot sooner. You think I'm kidding? All right, are we ready?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please.
Mr. Chairman?
Please.
I'd like to call up Amendment Sullivan number 2.
Could you hold just for 1 moment, again? We have to vote on Senator Capito's amendment number 1.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask unanimous consent that it be unanimous vote for Senator Capito's amendment.
Is there objection? Yeah. In that case, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. All right, thank you. All righty. Does any other senator wish to offer an amendment to this
Mr. Chairman?
legislation? Senator Sullivan.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to call up Sullivan Amendment number 2. I want to begin by thanking you and the ranking member on the excellent leadership on this bill. A lot of us know that this committee, despite having senators from kind of far ends of the political spectrum, we all work together really well and pass a lot of really important legislation, and I think this is going to be another important milestone that way. This WRDA bill is very important in my state. I like to say, Alaska, we're resource-rich, infrastructure-poor. We have less road miles than Connecticut, and yet we're almost 120 times bigger than Connecticut, and so these pieces of legislation are really important. Mr. Chairman, my amendment number 2 it goes to the issue of contaminated lands on Alaska Native lands, American Indian lands. I've been working closely with Senator Kelly on this. We had a really big land settlement in Alaska over 50 years ago called the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. Over 44 million acres. Federal and state land went to Alaska Native corporations, probably the largest Native indigenous land settlement in the history of the world. And yet, as you know, Mr. Chairman, a lot of that land was actually polluted. So the federal government gave Alaska Native corporations very polluted land. You and I worked together a couple of years ago, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate that. Believe it or not, under CERCLA, the EPA was going to sue the Alaska Native corporations to clean up the land that the federal government had polluted. Pretty crazy. We fixed that liability issue. But the estimates of the cleanup just in Alaska are well over $10 billion. We need innovative solutions on how to clean up those lands. And that's why Senator Kelly and I introduced the Contaminated Lands Reclamation Act of 2024. This would provide applicants, whether Alaska Native corporations or Indian tribes in Arizona, an opportunity for innovative solutions on land cleanup. However, Mr. Chairman, knowing that this bill is of limited scope and the GAO is still reviewing the nature and extent of the cleanup on Indian lower 48 lands and Alaska Native lands, I am going to withdraw my amendment, but I wanted to just speak to it with Senator Kelly here because we've made a lot of good progress on this. This committee's made a lot of good progress on this. We're hoping this is not a controversial bill at all, but an innovative bill. Maybe you don't need federal dollars, but other ways to clean up these contaminated lands to our nation's first peoples. But we are going to be respectful because we know the limited scope of this bill, and given that the chair and the ranking member asks that we withdraw it, we will withdraw it, but it's a really important bill for, I think, all of us, and I just wanted to speak to it. So with that, I withdraw Sullivan number 2.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Kelly.
Mr. Chairman, I want to echo Senator Sullivan's frustration that we weren't able to get this language from our bipartisan bill included in the base text of the WRDA bill. I understand that we're waiting for some GAO studies back from the prior WRDA bill related to this specific topic. And I agree that it's important that we get this policy right, so we get that. But tribal communities in Arizona, in Alaska, throughout the country have struggled with contaminated land for decades. So I hope that as this bill goes to the floor, we can continue to work on this issue because it is important to get this done. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You bet. Senator Capito, anything you want to add at this point?
Well, I just am committed to working with the two of you to see that that we can work to a better conclusion, more welcome conclusion for you all, but appreciate the fact that this does have limited scope, and this amendment was beyond the scope of the original bill, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Does any other senator wish to offer an amendment to our legislation? Any other amendments? If there are no further amendments, I move to approve and report this bill favorably. Is there a second?
I second.
Been moved and seconded. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Bowman? Yes. Mrs. Capito?
Aye.
Mr. Carter?
Aye.
Mr. Kramer?
Aye.
Mr. Fetterman? Mr. Graham?
Aye, by proxy.
Mr. Kelly. Aye. Ms. Lummis.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Markey. Aye. Mr. Merkley. Aye. Mr. Mullen.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Padilla. Aye. Mr. Ricketts. Aye. Mr. Sanders.
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Stabenow. Aye. Mr. Sullivan. Aye. Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Wicker. Aye. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Chairman, the yeas are 19, the nays are 0.
Did you say that again?
The yeas are 19, the nays are 0.
Is there objection? Anybody want to object to that? It doesn't get any better than that. All right. With that in mind, the bill is reported favorably. And I now call up 5 bills for committee consideration. The first of those, I mentioned it earlier, S3880, S3880, and and then HR 4688, followed by S3564, and 4293, and finally 4359. I also call up 2 amendments, and they include the Carper Capito Kelly Kramer Amendment, number 1 to S3880, an amendment in the nature of a substitute, and a Carper Amendment to number 1 to HR 4688, also an amendment in the nature of a substitute. I ask that both amendments be agreed to by unanimous consent. Is there objection? Hearing none. Without objection, I now move that the committee vote on all 5 bills en bloc by voice vote. Without objection, I move to report favorably. S3880 is amended, HR 4688 as amended, S3564, S4293, and 4359. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please say nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. And these 5 bills are favorably reported. I know for the record that a quorum of the committee is present. And that concludes the committee's votes for this business meeting. I want to thank again Senator Capito. I want to thank our staffs, both sides of the aisle. We have a couple of folks, a couple of our members want to speak after we finish this, after I finish my statement. But just want to thank everybody. A lot of work's been done, and great work's been done. The people say to me, even today on the train, why can't you guys figure out how to work together down there? And I wish they could see this committee, because that's what we do. And bipartisan solutions are lasting solutions, as we know. All right. With that having been said, I think I can yield to Senator Cardin, please.
Well,
thanks, everyone.
First, to our chairman and Senator Capito, thank you for your extraordinary leadership. And Senator Kramer, Senator Kelly, thank you for your leadership on the subcommittee. This is a good day for our committee. It's a good day for our nation. I want to thank you. There are many provisions in the WRDA 2024 that affect my state of Maryland, and I thank you for the cooperation in including those provisions, including dealing with feasibility studies on flooding problems on Coastal Highway in Ocean City, which the chairman is very familiar with since he gets caught in that flooding situation every once in a while, as well as Route 50 in Prince George's County. Secret Loop, which is extremely important to move forward. That will make the shipping channel, the Baltimore Harbor, much more efficient. We have issues to deal with the following up of our small harbors and underserved harbors that was in WRDA 2022. The rewatering issues dealing with ability to pay. But I want to mention one specific issue that we've had conversations about that's extremely important to our state, and that deals with the Baltimore Coastal Storm Risk Management. Included in the bill we just passed is to expedite the completion of the Chief's report in regards to that storm risk management study. We expect to have that report done by next month. And it is the practice of this committee that we do not authorize until the Chief's report is completed. I just want to point out that we do expect to have that completed by June, and assuming that that is as indicated, I would expect that we would be able to include it prior to the WRDA 2024 being acted on by the floor. I just want to get the chair's understanding on that. I just point out one additional point, Mr. Chairman. This report, moving forward by committee authorization in WRDA 2024, becomes even more important today because the risk management studies include the 2 tunnels, which are now the only route on the north-south corridor because of the Francis Scott Key Bridge will not be completed for a couple of years. So I would just ask the chairman's cooperation, ranking member's cooperation, that assuming the chief's report is back, which is the practice, that we would include that as an authorized project if it can be done in a timely way. You say yes. Appreciate the chair and ranking member's encouragement that would be done.
Unfortunately, they don't let me stay here forever, but you're stuck with me for at least another 6 or 7 months, and I'll do my best, my friend. Okay. Senator Kelly, would you, and then after Senator Kelly, Senator Padilla would like to be recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on negotiating your 4th WRDA bill. I value your partnership on this, and the entire country has benefited from your leadership. And I want to thank Ranking Member Capito and my partner on the Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee, Senator Kramer, for working together on this important legislation. 1 year ago, I led a hearing as chair of Transportation and the Infrastructure Subcommittee focused on how the Army Corps could respond to long-term drought in the western United States. And we heard a lot of solutions in that subcommittee hearing. And thanks to a lot of hard work, this year's Bipartisan Water Resources Development Act takes big steps to improve how we can prepare for long-term drought in the West. For example, this bill creates a new pilot program to allow the Army Corps to modify how a dam or reservoir operates in a drought-stricken region. This could let reservoirs like Roosevelt Dam in Arizona store additional water during wet winters and to be better prepared for future years when drought conditions are worse. It also gives the Army Corps the ability to respond to invasive plant species in drought-prone regions, such as the invasive salt cedar tree in Arizona, which both exacerbates drought and increases wildfire risks. It also allows the Army Corps and Bureau of Reclamation to work more closely together when updating flood control curves at reclamation facilities, which could increase water storage further. And it creates a new program to allow the Army Corps to partner with tribal communities to construct and manage Corps projects. Many of these projects were included in my legislation, the Drought Resilience Infrastructure Act, which I was proud to introduce with Senator Padilla and many of my colleagues from the western United States. Finally, today's bill also includes direction for the Corps to expedite the completion of more than 15 infrastructure projects in Arizona, including critical flood control projects in Winslow and Flagstaff, Arizona, where I chaired a subcommittee hearing earlier this year. I know the process of negotiating this bill wasn't easy, but it was through hard work and bipartisan cooperation that allowed us to get to this point. And I look forward to working together with Chairman Carper, Senator Capito, and Senator Kramer to get our bipartisan bill with these important priorities signed into law, which will make a real difference in the state of Arizona. Thank you.
Thank you for those words. My dad used to say, who's also a Navy guy, Chief Petty Officer in World War II, but my dad used to say, the harder we work, the luckier we get. And you're right, there's a lot of hard work that's gone into this. I just want to salute everybody, including you and your team, very much. All right.
Thank you.
Senator Padilla, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, wanted to highlight the committee's passage of 3 bills that the state of California will benefit greatly from, including the now Thomas R. Carper Water Resources Development Act. I love that. Along with legislation that I introduced to reauthorize the National Dam Safety Program, as well as the GSA Tribal Parity Act. In particular, I'm proud to see the authorization of funding to support environmental infrastructure and restoration for the Tijuana River Valley watershed. Since I joined the committee, I've worked to provide additional funding to address the flow of toxic sewage and waste that crosses the border and jeopardizes not just the environment and health of local communities, but the health and safety of Homeland Security personnel and military personnel in the region. Ensuring the Army Corps' partnership in this effort is another important step towards addressing this crisis. Was also glad to work with my friend Senator Kramer to reauthorize FEMA's National Dam Safety Program, which expired at the end of September, leaving thousands of high-risk dams across the country more vulnerable to failure and endangering the people who live in their vicinity. This program supports states with resources for training, for emergency planning, dam inspection, and monitoring of California's 1,530 dams. More than 800 are classified as high hazard potential. So the threat is real, the concern is real. And as climate change increases the risks of extreme flooding and threatens our nation's water infrastructure, we can't afford to let up on dam safety, but we're making progress here today. Finally, I want to celebrate the committee passage of the GSA Tribal Parity Act, which I introduced with Senator Langford, to dramatically improve the ability of tribal governments to acquire surplus federal buildings below market value if properties are being used for public purposes. As our nation works to strengthen tribal sovereignty and our relationship with tribes across the country, bills like this will ensure that we improve the federal government's relationship with tribal governments and ensure that they have the same land acquisitions opportunities as state and local governments currently enjoy. So thank you again, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Capito, for working with me on these bipartisan wins for our states. I look forward to working with all of my colleagues to move these bills to the President's desk as soon as possible. Thank you.
And congratulations on the good work, and thank you for being, you've been a great member of this committee. Thank you so much for being a part of us. Thank you. Any other senators wish to speak? If not, I'm going to yield to Senator Capito for any comments you'd like to make, please. Senator Capito.
Well, just briefly, I think that we see when we work hard and work out the differences that we can come to a unanimous conclusion in this committee, and we've done it under your leadership more than a few times, so I thank you for that. I would also like to thank the Army Corps of Engineers, because we couldn't have such a good, I think, product without all the technical advice that they give us and our staff to be able to work out some of the details that only they know the best way to do. So I want to give a shout out to them as well, because this obviously impacts their work, but at the same time, it wouldn't work as well without them weighing in heavily on the front end. So thank you very much.
To that last point, I just want to say amen. In our state, the Army Corps of Engineers plays a huge role. And we are very, very grateful for what they've done in years gone by and what they're doing even today. We have people on this committee who've served in uniform before, Marines, Danny, others, and we've had folks who are veterans of the Army, Air Force, Navy, and there's a fair amount of good-natured ribbing that goes on, as Senator Sullivan knows, and sometimes when, maybe somebody who's in the Army veteran who says, taking some shots at the Navy, my service, I'll say to him or her, I'll say that the different uniforms, same team. And we're different parties on this committee. We're divided equally. But at the end of the day, the same team. And the folks that we represent in states across this country, I think, can feel proud of the work that we've done. I know that I am. I know Senator Capito is. And again, we get credit for things that come out of this committee, bills and laws that come out of this committee, but we would be nowhere without our staffs. And I've mentioned the names, I think, of every key staff member who has worked very, very hard and to get us to this point in time. And with that, I got to have a short closing statement here, and we're going to call it a day. A little bit of housekeeping to wrap it up, and I have 3 unanimous consent agreements. The first, I ask unanimous consent for members to submit their statements for the record on the legislation that we have considered today, without objection. Second, I would like to ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a number of letters of support for the legislation that our committee is approving today, without objection. And I also ask unanimous consent that our staffs have authority to make technical and conforming changes to the legislation that our committee has approved today. and without objection. And with that, my thanks to everyone, especially this lady sitting next to me. Thank you all for your participation, to our staffs, everybody that's provided input to us as we've gone through this extraordinary process, And with that, the BIS business meeting is adjourned. Thanks so much. Good morning again. For those who've been with us for the first part of this program, I said to Senator Kelly, it's a little bit like a day-night doubleheader, except we get to do it all in the daytime. But I want to welcome everyone to this second half of our work load today. Pleased to call the hearing to order. Today we're gathered to talk about one of my favorite subjects, and I think a favorite subject of many members of our committee, and that is recycling. Specifically, today we are here to discuss a topic that we have explored any number of times before this committee, and that is the circular economy. First, I want to welcome our witnesses to the committee today. Secretary Beiser, Ms. Fife Ferris, and Mr. Marshall. There's a college in West Virginia named after you, the Thundering Herd, where my sister actually went to college. But we thank you all for joining us this morning. So what exactly is a circular economy anyway? As you'll recall, the circular economy is a model of production and consumption to which things we use during our daily lives are reused, repaired, or recycled instead of allowing those items to end up in a landfill or to litter our communities across America. As a number of our colleagues know, I care deeply about limiting waste through recycling and reusing. In fact, I've recycled just about everything from paint cans to electronics. And I like to run. I like to run outside a couple of days a week, and as I run along, when I come across beer cans or bottles or whatever, I pick them up. And people sometimes wonder what I'm doing, but I just like to pick them up and recycle them when I get home. And I'm too old to change. Too old to change. But one might ask, why is it important that we build a circular economy? Well, reusing and recycling products not only helps keep our communities cleaner, but that's an essential part of the solution to a series of crises facing our planet. These include escalating climate change, overflowing landfills, and alarming amounts of plastic choking our oceans. For example, recycling can reduce energy consumption. Producing aluminum products from recycled materials uses some 95% less energy than creating them from first-use materials. And it's not just aluminum. Many goods like paper and glass are more energy efficient to produce from recycled materials. And with more energy-efficient processes, manufacturers reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. Further, reducing waste from the products we use has significant economic benefits. For example, in 2020, the Environmental Protection Agency's Recycling Economic Information Report estimated that recycling and reuse activities support approximately 681,000 domestic jobs. How many jobs is that? Just for comparison's sake. That's more jobs than the entire workforce of the state of Rhode Island. Unfortunately, according to the Environmental Protection Agency, today we only recycle approximately 32% of our waste in the United States. That represents us with both a challenge and an opportunity. In adversity lies opportunity. Many of our colleagues know that's something I believe deeply, and I think my colleagues do as well. I believe we have an opportunity to clean up our communities, an opportunity to support jobs and economic growth, and protect our planet by actively supporting recycling and reuse as ways to reduce waste in our economy. Fortunately, we have taken bipartisan action in recent years to seize the day, seize the opportunity. The 116th Congress, as some of you may recall, members of this committee worked together to lead the passage of the Save Our Seas Act 2.0 Act. That law established the Solid Waste Infrastructure for Recycling, or SWIFR, grant program at the Environmental Protection Agency to support waste management programs across our country. As some of you will recall, last Congress, a bipartisan infrastructure law, which Senator Capito and I helped to write, and we literally worked on it in this committee, hearing room and beyond with the administration. But last Congress, the bipartisan infrastructure law provided funding for this grant program. And specifically, this historic law provides $275 million over 5 years for the SWIFR program, and some $75 million over 5 years for recycling education and outreach grants. EPA announced awards for the SWIFR grant program in November of last year, represented the largest federal investment in recycling in over 30 years. And every single state has been awarded funding through that program. SWIFR grants are flexible and can be used for many different programs and purposes. For example, in Delaware, we will use part of our funding to conduct research on using recycled glass as a constant. This is very unique. I think this is very cool stuff. But using recycled glass as a cost-effective alternative to sand for beach replenishment. The city of Baltimore, Maryland, where Ben Cardin is from, will use its SWIFR grant to build a solar-powered composting facility. And the state of Arkansas will use its funding to update its statewide waste management plan for the 21st century. And today, we'll hear more about how the city of Seattle, Washington, is using its SWIFR grant to build a warehouse to help reuse salvaged lumber from old buildings. And if more cities found ways to reuse building materials, as Seattle is doing, we could create approximately 200,000 jobs. Let me say that again. If more cities found ways to reuse building materials, as Seattle is doing, we could create approximately 200,000 jobs and reduce carbon emissions associated with building materials by almost 40% by the year 2050, according to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation estimates. Today, we're looking forward to learning more from our panelists about what is working in communities across our nation. And as the members of this committee have often heard me say more than a few times, we need to find out what works and do more of that. As members of this committee will recall, in the Senate, we are continuing to advance bipartisan solutions that will support the innovative work happening on the ground in communities across America. Our ranking member, Senator Capito, along with Senator Bozeman and yours truly, authored 2 recycling bills to improve data collection on our nation's recycling and composting systems and to expand recycling infrastructure in rural communities. In fact, these bills just passed the Senate about 2 months ago, back in March. In closing, I believe that we should seize the opportunity in front of us to create a circular economy that protects our planet, strengthens our communities, and recycles jobs. And we must do so by collaborating across all levels of government. That includes nonprofits, that includes the private sector, which we'll hear from a lot here today. And before we turn to our panel of witnesses, I want to turn it over to Senator Capito and thank her for her terrific leadership on these issues, and for not just for West Virginia, but for our country. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the panel for being here with us today. And we're going to revisit a topic that we've talked about a lot in the committee, the benefits of recycling and policy options to improve our recycling infrastructure. After hearing about specific recycling challenges, Chairman Carper and I introduced and shepherded through the Senate the 2 bills that the chairman talked about. These 2 bills, the chairman's bill is Recycling, Composting, and Accountability Act, and my bill is the Recycling, Infrastructure, and Accessibility Act. They both await action in the House. And for the life of me, I cannot believe that we can't get these bills over the finish line. We've been trying for like 3 years, and they're quite simple and just a very beginning step. But we're going to keep trying. We're going to push this and try to get into law. We are also, maybe if I named it after you, maybe we'd have better luck.
No, we're trying to get them passed.
We are also committed to an ongoing evaluation by the committee of the capacity of our nation's recycling systems to handle increasing amounts of waste. A fundamental challenge is how to improve the recycling collections infrastructure across the nation in the face of low demand for recycled materials. In examining that challenge, we should consider what, if any, additional role there is for government, or at what level. The federal government's role should reflect the well-established spirit of cooperative federalism that the regulation of waste management is based upon. Federal policy solutions should supplement, not replace or override state, local, and private initiatives and programs. One area to consider is whether more clarity is needed for recycling labeling to provide better information to households. Recycling information should be easy to understand and in line with today's recycling infrastructure. The 3 chasing arrows label that we are accustomed to seeing on consumer products is outdated and actively misleads consumers. The average consumer should not need a microscope to decipher the line print on a label to see if something is recyclable in their community. The lack of consistent and clear labeling on everyday products is due to great variation in existing infrastructure and local recycling requirements across the country. That's why the pizza box can be recycled here in D.C., but it goes straight into the trash when I'm at home. Today's hearing is focused on the role of federal programs to support local waste management efforts. So we will hear today federal grants alone are not a magic bullet solution, but they are one tool that can help spur private sector investment to build that collection infrastructure. Grant recipients can leverage that funding into zero interest or below interest rate loans. This helps to reduce risk and attract private sector investments into emerging technologies and infrastructure. Competitive grants are also inherently flexible funding mechanisms. This is particularly impactful within the recycling sector, as grants can be tailored to the unique needs of a particular recycling facility or community. So we consider the potential role that federal government may fill in our recycling infrastructure. I do have two key areas of concern. First, competitive grant programs are frequently accompanied by rigorous and complex application requirements. The short time frames and complicated requirements can disadvantage rural communities that are unable to compete with large urban centers due to the lack of resources. The lack of rural recycling infrastructure is one of the key challenges, I think, facing our recycling system. We must address rural participation in our competitive grant programs. Secondly, the U.S. recycling system will never be sustainable if there is an over-reliance on federal grant funding. Grants should be used to attract and not replace private sector investment into recycling infrastructure. Recycling systems operate on the premise that materials can be recovered, reprocessed, and then resold to consumers. Without viable markets with consumers willing to pay for recyclable goods, those recycling systems will collapse. And we've seen that sort of in the past, regardless of how much taxpayer dollars are thrown into this. So I look forward to hearing from our panel today. And with that, I yield back my time.
Thanks so much. We're going to turn now to our panel of witnesses. And on behalf of all the members of this committee, thank you for joining us today and to share your perspectives on federal programs on the circular economy. Thank you even more for the good that you do with your lives for our states and our country and for our planet. I think first we're going to hear from Secretary Elizabeth Beiser, and who is currently the Secretary of North Carolina's Department of Environmental Quality. Who was your predecessor in that role?
Administrator Michael Regan.
No kidding. You ever talk to him?
I do.
Good, all right. My wife's from North Carolina. She's from Boone up in the mountains. And I told her that we're having the Secretary of from North Carolina come, and she said to tell Billy hello and go get him, girl. Secretary Beiser was appointed by an old friend, Roy Cooper, governor of North Carolina. What was it, 2021? Yeah. And Secretary Beiser joined us, I think it was in 2021, to share some of your thoughts on the circular economy and concept. We look forward to hearing from you again today about how circularity has changed in the past 2.5 years, and it has changed. Next, we're joined by Susan Fife Ferris, who serves as the Director of Solid Waste Planning and Program Management for Seattle Public Utilities. In a role, Ms. Fife, you go by Ms. Fife Ferris, is that right? There you go, okay. F squared, there we go. So, she leads the city's solid waste management division, focusing on strategic and long-range planning. Welcome. And lastly, we're going to hear from Cody Marshall, who is the Chief Systems Optimization Officer for Recycling Partnership. Mr. Marshall leads the Recycling Partnership's efforts to provide grants and resources to local and state recycling programs across our nation. We thank you all for coming before our committee today. We're grateful to you for joining us to discuss this important topic. And we'll now begin witness testimony. I'm going to ask Secretary Beiser if you'll be our leadoff hitter and proceed with your statement at this time. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chairman Carper, and thank you, Senator, Ranking Member Capito, members of the
Senator
committee.
Bozeman's about to, I think he has John? Senator Bozeman, before you I just want us to take a minute. He's a great partner in this, a great leader on this front, not just for his state, but for our country. And I just want to say what a joy and an honor it is to work with you, especially on this issue, these issues.
Let me just say likewise to you and Shelley for working so hard. And then again, the key to it all has been our staff. They've worked really hard and do a great job together. And as you pointed out earlier in the business meeting, I mean, this is how this place ought to work. You know, again, not only between us, but between our staffs working really hard. So thank you all for being here, and we appreciate all you do very, very much.
Thank you, sir. There's a great song that she works hard for the money, and our staffs work really hard for the money, as you know, and we're grateful for that. All right, thank you. Ms. Beiser, why don't you go ahead and jump into it?
Wonderful. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Capito, members of the committee. I really appreciate the opportunity to come back today to talk about the circular economy in North Carolina and specifically how we've utilized efforts and investment under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to further our recycling efforts. These investments, Mr. Chairman, as you noted, mark the most significant federal investments in recycling in decades to states. And as we're seeing through the fact that every single state and territory and the district all opted into the solid waste infrastructure and recycling grant program, the SWIFR program, we see that this is a universal issue across states. As the president of the Environmental Council of States, I can tell you that sustainable material management is
you were
on the mind.
Also the president
That's
as
right.
well. That's a lot of titles.
Lots of titles. It's on the mind of a lot of my colleagues. You know, one of the things that we are focused on this year, one of our organizational priorities, is advancing the circular economy. Today, I'll talk to you a little bit about how North Carolina is using investments from the IIJA to advance our circular economy, how building state capacity for recycling is so vital to addressing the needs of our infrastructure, developing end markets, and making sure that we're furthering resident education. In North Carolina, we like to say a healthy economy and a healthy environment go hand in hand. And to make that a reality, we need a firm foundation of good data on which to make smart and strategic investments. The majority of SWIFR funding to states is going towards data collection efforts and development of solid waste management plans, in some cases for the very first time in other states. At North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, we are using the approximately $600,000 that we received to conduct a statewide materials management optimization study. That will include a statewide waste characterization study, market assessments for key commodities, a gap analysis for material recovery facilities, and a recycling hub and spoke infrastructure assessment to address recycling in the rural parts of our state. This data is going to enable us to make smart and strategic decisions about where to invest resources where we can get the maximum return on investment. This is critical because the conversation is different than it was when I was last here to talk about this issue in 2021. States like mine have not traditionally been worried about landfill capacity issues. We've been talking about this more in terms of job and economic investment, but now we're starting to see the conversation evolve. In North Carolina, our two largest regional landfills, which together accept about 25% of our state's waste, are approaching capacity within the next decade. This comes at a time...
Where are those located?
They're in Charlotte and in the southeastern part of our state. So this comes at a time when our state's growing very rapidly. So boosting our recycling efforts, we're going to ensure that that end-of-life material that's actually feeding our economy, creating jobs, economic investment, and creating manufacturing feedstock for local industries that desperately need it. In fact, more than 15,700 North Carolinians are directly employed by the 550 recycling businesses in our state. So as we continue to make investments, we anticipate we'll see those numbers continue to grow. We're also making investments in education and outreach. We know that there's a significant amount of contamination of the waste stream due to wish cycling or residents putting materials in their bins that don't belong there. And that results in contamination issues that increase costs for local governments and make the sortation and processing recyclables more difficult. So North Carolina is also using SWIFR funding to advance our Recycle Right and our Use the Food NC material management campaigns. These two campaigns advance the goals of reducing the amount of contamination in the recycling stream and also reducing the amount of wasted food going into our landfills. We're also providing grants to local governments to help them with their education and outreach efforts as well. One way we know that we can reduce confusion about what and where they can recycle where, Senator Capito, you mentioned the pizza box example, is to invest in MRF infrastructure. Accepted materials vary across jurisdictions because the level of modernization and what materials different MRFs can accept vary across jurisdictions. And so the information that we gather through our SWIFR-funded study will help us identify where there are gaps in the MRF processing infrastructure and where modernization efforts could improve the quantity and the quality of materials that are recycled. While we tend to think about the traditional recyclables of our plastic bottles, our aluminum cans, cardboard, we also need to think about the infrastructure to handle wasted food, which composes nearly a quarter of the waste stream. The climate footprint of wasted food is large. In fact, a recent EPA study showed that wasted food is responsible for nearly 60% of methane emissions from solid waste landfills.
Would you say that again?
So the EPA study found that wasted food is responsible for nearly 60% of methane emissions from solid waste landfills. It's a staggering number. At the same time, we've got more than 44 million Americans that live in food insecure households who could very much benefit from the food that's still edible that makes its way to landfills. My agency in 2022 did a study to see what our composting capacity was versus how much food we're generating. We found that we generate nearly 2.5 million tons of food waste per year, while our capacity for commercial composters in the state can only handle 350,000 tons. So that leaves a 2.1 million ton gap. We know that investments in composting infrastructure are an example of how states can encourage in-market development, generate jobs, and leverage private economic investment, and mitigate waste by turning that potential waste product into a commodity. We also provide data and information to manufacturers who are considering locating to our state to help them look at where material is being generated, and those investments also help protect our environment and grow our economy. So I'll emphasize again that we cannot pursue these actions without sufficient state capacity and resources. We know that recycling is an inherently local activity, and having the state capacity be robust and have the information and data we need to help our local governments is key to helping advance the circular economy. I encourage Congress and this committee to continue to invest in recycling, to build state capacity, and to support the infrastructure, education, and end markets needed to move towards a truly circular economy. Everyone, whether we're in North Carolina or across the country, is thinking about how we can more sustainably manage our materials. There is no better example of a healthy environment and a healthy economy going hand in hand. So I'm grateful for the opportunity today to share my state's perspective, and I greatly appreciate this committee's, and especially Senator Capito and Senator Carper, your support of this issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us again in this room, and thank you for your testimony today. Now we're going to turn to Ms. Fife Ferris and to hear her testimony. Welcome. Good to see you today. Thanks for joining us. Please proceed.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairman Carper, Ranking Member Capito, and members of the committee. My name is Susan Fife Ferris, and I'm Director of Solid Waste Planning Management for Seattle Public Utilities. Thank you for inviting me today to testify. Seattle has been an international leader in the solid waste management for decades, including waste prevention, recycling, and composting organic materials. Our vision is zero waste. We owe our success to strong public and private support focused on protecting and improving community and environmental health. Our city still faces challenges and has limited control or influence over the large and complex solid waste system. This is why leadership at the national level is so important to help eliminate waste and create a truly circular economy. Funding for the Solid Waste Infrastructure for Recycling, or SWIFR, grant program included in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act has been critical for important reuse and recycling strategies and projects throughout our nation. Seattle is a fortunate recipient of one of these grants, which will allow us to establish a salvage lumber warehouse to support our local deconstruction sector in salvaging lumber that can be reclaimed and reused from old buildings. The SWIFR grant will provide seed money necessary to attract a private company to site a salvaged lumber warehouse to ensure that recovered lumber can be stored, marketed, and sold. This funding will help fill a critical gap in the infrastructure and lay the foundation for sustained preservation of the precious resource that this lumber represents. We strongly encourage the Senate to extend the SWIFR funding, as well as other funding mechanisms, such as the Consumer Recycling Education and Outreach Grant Program, beyond the 2026 end date. The federal government can also play a critical role by supporting consistent and accurate data collection at a national level and using this data to drive effective programs and investments in the solid waste field. Seattle has collected data and used data to inform our management of solid waste for over 30 years, and we know how important and foundational it is. Therefore, we support passage of the Chairman's legislation, Recycling and Compost Accountability Act, that is a great start for providing the support needed for data collection and analysis nationwide. The ranking member's legislation, Recycling Infrastructure and Accessibility Act, would also be an important step forward to help increase collection of recyclables by making recycling more convenient and accessible. Many communities throughout the country don't have access to basic recycling, resulting in valuable materials going into a landfill. I hope the committee will move both bills forward. Our Reuse Seattle initiative is an example of where a government entity can play a role in developing a circular economy and facilitating the reduction and eventual elimination of single-use plastic products. Single-use plastic products and packaging in the food service industry. The federal government can play a role by supporting the development of standards and providing local governments funds to invest in reuse systems and infrastructure. Federal investments can provide the seeds that help grow the reuse ecosystem. Additionally, we support the federal government financially incentivizing waste prevention, reuse, and the use of post-consumer recycled content through grants and tax credits. Adopting a national design for recyclability standards for products and packaging that includes standards for use of post-consumer recycled content. Reducing subsidies to virgin materials such as petrochemical feedstocks that directly compete with the post-consumer recycled plastics. Creating accountability throughout the recycling system by setting mandatory capture rate goals tied to timelines, standardized reporting requirements, and verification of responsible end markets. Supporting a national framework for extended producer responsibility for packaging and paper products that holds producers responsible for their products and packaging ensures they provide adequate and stable financial support for the recycling industry and local communities. Supporting whole life cycle analysis of materials that considers externalities such as plastic residuals that impact marine life. And adopting national labeling standards to reduce consumer confusion and support ability to recycle responsibly. We applaud the Senate's efforts to support the United States' shift to a circular approach. As you look to the future, Seattle strongly encourages you to place a greater emphasis upstream on waste prevention and reuse, while also continuing to support increased downstream diversion of recyclables and organics to reliable and responsible markets. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for that. And now we're going to hear from Mr. Marshall. And Mr. Marshall, we're looking forward to your testimony. Thanks for joining us. Welcome. You're recognized to proceed.
Thank you. Chairman Carper, Ranking Member Capito, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the importance of community grants to advance circularity, especially the Solid Waste Infrastructure Grant Program, or SWIFR. My name is Cody Marshall, and I serve as the Chief System Optimization Officer for the Recycling Partnership, a purpose-driven organization that has a singular mission to build a better recycling system. I have the distinct honor to lead a team that makes grants to communities across the United States to optimize and modernize recycling infrastructure and increase participation in recycling programs. My introduction to the recycling industry was as a college student in rural Ohio, driving a truck collecting recyclables from campus. I made recycling my career 16 years ago in Orange County, North Carolina, by taking on the challenge of managing their curbside and rural recycling programs. It was there that I witnessed the profound impact on recycling can have on communities. Drawing from my experience in Orange County and consulting for various public sector entities, I recognize a pressing need for a coordinated improvement within the recycling system. With that ambition in mind, I helped launch the Recycling Partnership. Over the past 10 years, we have worked closely with communities, public sector leaders, nonprofits, and the private sector to deliver real impact across more than 3,500 recycling programs from major cities to small towns. Public sector, private sector partnerships have been critical to reduce waste, build local economies, and strengthen our domestic supply chains. It is from this experience that I address this committee. Last year, we had the privilege of working with the City of New Orleans to assist in developing their proposal for SWIFR funding. I'm happy to report that because of this funding, the city will offer curbside recycling service to all 150,000 single-family homes. Not only will this deliver real results, the SWIFR funding unlocked additional funding from the partnership, which was made possible from private sector dollars. The public-private partnership will ensure the SWIFR funding is an enduring investment, providing new materials for years to come. Swiffer funding is making possible an enormous impact in New Orleans and across the country, but many more communities need assistance. I cannot express enough how important it is that we fund the Swiffer program in 2025. When communities receive grants like Swiffer, they can provide access to more residents, modernize recycling systems, and develop cleaner streams of materials. Grants have impacts long beyond their initial phase. Equally as important are the resources needed to build an equitable, efficient, and transparent recycling system across the United States. Thank you, Chairman Carper and Ranking Member Capito, for introducing two critical pieces of legislation: the Recycling and Composting Accountability Act and the Recycling Infrastructure and Accessibility Act. Both bills, when passed, will provide important data and resources needed to ensure our domestic recycling systems deliver on the promise of a circular economy. There's a lot of work to be done to make recycling systems as effective and efficient as possible. This involves rethinking how materials are produced, how packages are designed, and what happens after products are consumed. It is this reason the Recycling Partnership both insists on meaningful change across the recycling system and assists communities and companies in enacting such change. We know that good policy has an important role to play. We are working with states across the nation to advocate for and implement extended producer responsibility. By establishing a national framework for EPR, we will be able to provide the funding and resources needed to transform the way we use and rely on materials. In doing so, we will establish the supply infrastructure and the demand for recycled content necessary for a circular economy. On behalf of the leadership of the Recycling Partnership, I can attest that we remain fully committed as a partner and a resource to Congress, our private sector partners, and our communities to deliver a better recycling system. Thank you for your time and your lasting commitment to the change Americans deserve.
Well, thank you for your time and for your commitment from all of us to all of you. Marshall, I mentioned earlier, Marshall University's in Huntington, West Virginia, as you know. They've had some great football teams, some of the best football teams in the country, actually, over the years. And thinking about how we take the legislation that Senator Capito, Senator Bozeman, and I, and others have crafted and moved through this committee, moved through the Senate, how we get it through the House and onto the President's desk. And we've made great progress. But I use a football analogy. We're inside the red zone, but the ball's not inside the end zone. And so as we leave here today, we've got to figure out how to get this ball into the end zone. I think we can. I think we can. All politics is personal, and as a friend of mine once likes to say, and we got to push every button to get this done. There's so much that's depending on it. So many jobs, so much good for our economy, just good in terms of climate change. It works in so many different ways that we got to get the job done. My first question will really be to the entire panel, and I want to focus on Swiffer grants. And as I think you all have mentioned in your testimony, Swiffer grant, EPA Swiffer grant program has unlocked funding for unique waste management projects across our entire country. States, communities, and non-governmental organizations have also awarded grants on their own for projects that bolster our nation's recycling systems. My question for each of you. And would you each please share with us how these federal investments will protect the environment as well as contribute to the economy and job creation in communities across our nation? And Mr. Marshall, I'm going to ask you to respond first, and we'll go to your right.
Well, absolutely. Thank you. As a granting organization, I can tell you that over the past 10 years of our existence, the money that we've invested in this system has resulted in the capture of more than 1 billion pounds of new recyclables, avoiding 1 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions. So Swiffer is going to be doing the same things. And the recycling system, if resourced in the appropriate way that we believe needs to be resourced, it can result in a $30 billion positive economic impact through job creation and private sector investment.
All right. Ms. Faris, did you agree with anything he's just said?
Do I agree with it? Yeah, I agree with it.
All right, go ahead.
said.
Proceed, please.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, thank you. We're very excited about the possibility of bringing a private company to actually fill a hole in what we determined was the gap in the circular economy for the salvaged lumber in our area. This will displace the need to actually take virgin lumber out of our forests. It will also create carbon sinks. This old lumber is actually old growth forests. You know, when you think about it, anything before 1940 was harvested out of our old growth forests. So these are carbon sinks, and it's so much better. And then from an economic point of view, these are jobs. You have jobs for the people who are deconstructing the houses, and we're actually complementing the funds that we're getting from Swiffer to train more people to do that. There's jobs to transport the lumber. There's jobs to actually denail and process the lumber. There's jobs to market it, and then there's jobs to sell it. So and then there's the jobs for the actual rebuilding of new houses. So these all create opportunities for new jobs in this sector. And then beyond that, the money is being used in other areas, in other arenas. Like in Hawaii, they're going to be using it in the reuse arena, and I can talk about that at a later time.
Okay. Same question, Ms. Secretary Beiser, please.
In addition to we have a local government, Durham County, who received a grant through Swiffer to update and reconstruct their convenience center in a disadvantaged community. So we're seeing some real impacts along those lines. But just to talk about the state data aspect of it for a moment. I mentioned earlier, recycling being an inherently local activity, and it's important that states have the capacity they need to support those programs to help them understand how they can optimize and make sure that they're reaching their residents and providing access. So having the ability to invest in data, which is not something we often have, is going to be really critical, not just for my state, but for other states. Understand what's in the waste stream, understand where material is being generated, where the infrastructure to collect that material is lacking. We have some MRF deserts that we're trying to address, especially in the northeastern part of our state. So the more we can learn about what's being generated there, which residents have access, which don't, we can help support our local governments to make sure that not only can they provide additional resources, but also as we have a limited amount of grant funding as a state that we can give out. We want to make sure we're maximizing our rate of return on that, leveraging any kind of private investment we can, and data is going to enable us to do all of those things.
All right, thank you. Thank you each for your responses. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, the absolutely critical role that the private sector can play in this as part of partnerships with governments and local and state and federal. In my legislation, we do prioritize trying to find funding for financially viable public-private partnerships. You mentioned leveraging the private sector. Do you have a good example of where this is being done very well already in North Carolina, and what kind of impacts that's having?
Sure. I can give you an example of ClearPath Recycling in North Carolina received a total of $140,000 over 3 cycles from us in grants. And this is from state dollars I'll just reference, but this is a good example of if we have more to invest, the type of experience we can have. It led to a $1.7 million private investment, so the $140,000 leveraged $1.7 million in that private investment and added 90 jobs to that facility.
Is that a one location?
One location, and added 6,500 tons of added capacity to their operation. I'll just say in general, we have different grant programs, but one of the grant programs that is giving money directly to recycling businesses requires a match, but what we end up seeing is a 3-to-1 match is what ends up happening in each of these situations. So we're leveraging a lot of private dollars by investing a little bit of state dollars.
Yeah. Mr. Marshall, do you have a good example for me on where those, I know you have members that are private and public, so the partnerships that are going on that you could recognize?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're a great example of how the private sector is stepping up. Over the years, we've leveraged over $200 million in private funding in these grant projects. And but I'd also like to note that what ends up happening is the collection part of the recycling programs is the most expensive part of recycling, and that's often always managed by city and county governments. So when we fund and grant those programs, we're able to see that supply is unlocked, and when that supply is unlocked through the granting programs, we almost always see the private sector coming in to invest in the local economy to use that material throughout the supply chain.
I want to ask about rural America too, because obviously I live in a rural state. Every state has rural areas, and there are real problems with trying to have the sustainability of a recycling program. The local governments can't really afford them. There's education issues as to what can be recycled, how, when, and where. There have been a lot of stops and starts in rural. I mean, I can speak from my own city. We've had programs, and then we haven't had a program, and then we have a program, and then it's a limited program, and it causes citizens to just sort of throw up their hands and kind of give up a little bit, where we don't want that. What could you recommend, and I'll go to you, Secretary Beiser, because you've got obviously a lot of rural in North Carolina. How can we do better with our rural? We're introducing a spoken hub kind of system that can help these rural communities have viable recycling programs.
Senator Capito, first of all, I appreciate your leadership in trying to get resources for hub and spoke systems. I think that is one of the primary methods that we look to. As Mr. Marshall noted, there is a lot of cost in the collection aspect of recycling, and this is an area that we can help local governments reduce some of their cost. It can be very expensive to have somebody come pick up a load from a very small town that can't fill up the back of a tractor trailer load. But if you're able to have centralized locations to collect materials among a lot of smaller towns, they can pool their resources and better afford to have programs in place. We know that recycling is hard to turn on and off like a faucet, because then you create a lot of confusion and reduces participation rates. So the more that we can find solutions like that are infrastructure-based and other ways to help assist with the cost, I think the better will be for rural recycling.
So, Ms. Fife-Ferris, Seattle's obviously not a rural area, but you've probably seen areas in your state or that feed into your system maybe. How does that, what improvements could we make there?
So we've actually been working at a state level on our hopefully getting extended producer responsibility that would then create funding for the rural areas. It is a big problem, and it's not an easy fix. And the hope would be that then we could have resources that could be invested in the rural areas in a stable manner to ensure that they have accessibility with the hub and spoke type of a program with drop-off and other things. And so those are approaches that we're working at a state level, because we want to bring equity statewide with respect to recycling. We're also working upstream trying to get products to be more consistent and recyclable, because regardless of whether you have access to recycling, if you don't have good products that are recyclable to put into that bin or drop off, and then you have markets that they're going to be sold into downstream, that also causes a hitch in making the recycling not possible, and that impacts rural communities more than communities.
Right, we're going to need more materials.
Right.
As we move towards, hopefully, this circular economy. And that means rural America, every part of the country has to really play here effectively, because we know we have enough waste to do that. It's just getting it to the right place. Let me just ask for a clarification here on extended producer responsibility. So let's take an example of a piece of clothing, maybe, or maybe food. You mentioned food. So that would be that the producer of whatever that product is, and maybe food's not a good example, something that's more sustained, like a glass bottle, we'll just use that. That means whoever produces the glass bottle would pay into a system. Is that what it means to you? And then that money would then go to the localities to help with the recycling? Is that what?
So in a typical producer responsibility, we're talking about packaging and paper products,
Okay.
usually not clothing, though. We have producer responsibilities for paint and,
Right.
medicine and all
Right.
kinds of things. But right now, we're working on what's the bulk of in our recycling
Right,
cart
okay.
or in our garbage. And yes, it would depend on how you define producer, but it would be the person like who puts it into your marketplace.
Right.
So the brand or the producer, it depends on who's putting it into your marketplace.
Right.
And then they would pay a fee based on the volume of the numbers and then what that material is that they're using. How recyclable is it?
Right.
So they use a term called eco-modulation, where the cost of putting that product into the market will be determined by how easily recyclable that is and captured for, end markets.
So are you doing this now?
No,
you're
you're
looking
actually,
to do
but
it.
but California and Oregon are setting up systems for it, as are Colorado and Maine. They're the 4 states that have
Okay.
passed producer responsibility programs, all different but somewhat similar. And so the money would go into a pot, and that money would be managed by a PRO, which is a producer responsibility organization that's actually made up of the private sector producers, and then they report to the state as a regulatory body. But there would be what we call rates and dates. So in other words, they would try to have capture rates based on the different types of materials by a certain date, and they would use the funding to help set up programs to ensure that that happens statewide.
Sounds like there's a lot to iron out there to figure that out. But I'm not saying it's not worth it. I'm sure it is, but a lot of details to figure out. But anyway, appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, great questions. Senator Sullivan, thanks for rejoining us. You're
Thank-
recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate the witnesses testifying today. As I mentioned in my remarks just a couple minutes ago here, Alaska, we're a resource-rich but infrastructure-poor state in terms of just everything: roads, bridges, ports, harbors, telecommunications. But that infrastructure poverty also extends to recycling infrastructure, particularly in our rural communities. So these Swiffer grants are good news. They're part of my and Senator Whitehouse's Save Our Seas 2.0 legislation, and the bipartisan infrastructure bill was already mentioned. One thing that I've heard about, and I'd like Ms. Beiser and Mr. Marshall, maybe you can take a crack at this, that the process in terms of funding has been very slow. And are there ways to streamline the EPA funding process to get these grants out faster, and then maybe even simplify it, right? One thing that you don't want to have happen, and you guys are very familiar with how to write grants and everything, but for a lot of communities, that's a big undertaking just in and of itself. And you don't want the groups that are kind of the professionals at grant writing to always get the grants. So streamlining, getting the resources out more quickly, and then helping communities that maybe aren't, so experienced in this. Those are broad questions, but I'd love your views on them.
Well, thank you, Senator Sullivan. And I know Alaska has some particular challenges. I don't believe there's a material recovery facility in your state that can add to some of the challenges. So excited to see you all receiving funding. I believe that Alaska's undertaking a solid waste management plan with this funding, which is also a great step. In terms of the EPA process, I know that this was a situation where they had to create a new grant program completely from scratch. So in working...
Which is a good thing, but also a scary thing. Right?
It can be challenging.
Depending on which way they go with it.
And I'll tell you, we've worked closely with the office that has been building this program and understand that they've been working, I think, as quickly as they can, but still hear frustrations from folks who want to get funding out more quickly. I will say for the next round of funding, we're hearing that could be potentially sometime in October. So we're anticipating having those opportunities again. I know that North Carolina looks to provide technical assistance to our communities to help as they're applying in this grant program and in other programs under the IIJA. And we will continue to do that. The other area that we are receiving technical assistance and that EPAs are providing across the country is for the CPRG grants.
Yeah.
That'll be another potential area that we could take advantage of. That's a bigger pot of funding, and especially aiming towards any kind of climate emission reductions, including food waste. So I know that our state is planning to take advantage of that as well. So we do appreciate the technical assistance. I will say that we try to have patience with EPA since they were creating something brand new. It's always a challenge, and we'll continue to work with them if we see opportunities to streamline.
Good. Mr. Marshall?
Yeah, it is a challenge to manage these types of granting programs. We have about 150 active grants at the Recycling Partnership, and I myself have about 30 people working on them. So it's just really critical to resource them because there's a lot of questions. You have to pay invoices, But the positive thing about this, we reimburse a lot. So upon award, action starts happening. So I know money might not be flowing yet, but momentum is growing in these places that have been awarded. So there might be a positive way to look at this also, because they are excited that they received the award. They're looking for other money. They've contacted us for additional money to match the EPA dollars. So action is happening, even if money might not be flowing. And then I really appreciate you bringing up that critical needs to support these local governments to help write the grants. We supported a few communities that needed to write grants to apply for this money, and I think that would be a really critical step to really have a robust system to help urban areas and the rural areas can apply, because you're right, people that would apply to this are also the arborist or the sheriff at their local government. They don't have time to write grants.
Yeah, or they don't have the experience. Let me
That's right.
end with just a follow-up question, and I'm kind of running out of time here. So,
No, you're not. You're not.
Ms. Fife-Ferris, I understand you were a consultant in Alaska a number of years ago, and so you know these challenges specifically with regard to rural communities, limited financial resources for communities that are trying to benefit from these kind of programs. And then maybe just a question for all of you. I know, Mr. Marshall, you've also testified about the importance of public-private partnerships. The feds, the state, the local governments can't, they can't do everything here. So how do we enhance that element of addressing this broader challenge? So maybe, Ms. Fife-Ferris, if we can start with you.
That's a tough question, to get the private industry.
But also
engaged.
your experience with
my
the
experience.
rural communities and in Alaska in particular.
Yeah. So when I was working primarily in Juneau, and we were working on a landfill, and they had a waste-to-energy facility that the local government was looking at taking over. But I also consulted with up in Anchorage and Fairbanks. Yeah, you can't bury waste very easily when the ground's frozen. You don't have some place to take it. You don't have roadways to haul your material out of your city. You have to barge it. We looked at barging recyclables down to California. We looked at barging recyclables to Hawaii at one point. It's really, really difficult. And so you have to look at the community. And I think this is a great area where waste prevention and using durables, getting rid of single-use plastics, looking at what's right for the community that you're in, and not something that fits for Seattle isn't necessarily going to fit for one of your small rural communities, on the coastline. But there are ways to do it. And then the materials that are coming into your area should be recyclable and easily to capture. And then you can backhaul them, you can back barge them. And in other words, you're bringing up supplies up to the area, and then you backhaul them on that same barge or thing. So there are ways to work it out, but it's not an easy solution.
Yeah, and it's expensive.
And it's expensive. Producer responsibility. You make it, you manage it.
Yeah. Mr. Marshall, on the public-private partnership issue, I know you've testified on that before.
Yes, absolutely. And so I think sharing the stories of public-private partnerships is critical in this space. That's one way to do it. So the Recycling Partnership actually received a grant from EPA Region 4 to start 10 years ago. So that's really got our start, and now we're fully funded by the private sector to deliver funds. And this, I'd also highlight that those stories and connections are really happening at the local level with the Conference of Mayors. This has been a major subject for them every single year. And so I just think what you're highlighting is critical to really lean in and learn how to do it. We're trying to get in front of as many local governments as possible so they understand how to access these dollars.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks to the witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. I just want to acknowledge the good work that you and Sheldon Whitehouse, Senator Whitehouse, have done on Save Our Seas. That is still bearing fruit. And before I ask another question or two, I still want to say that my staff and I'd be happy to work together with your folks, and certainly we hope with Senator Capito's team to ensure that EPA provides technical assistance to rural communities in Alaska and West Virginia and other places where they need it in this regard, and when they apply for grants. So, yeah, you bet. Okay. We've had some mention here today with methane, food waste, and that sort of thing. I must say, we have a son who lives out in the Bay Area in California, and so every now and then we go out and fly out and see him. We fly in and out of SFO, San Francisco Airport, and you go walk through that airport, and they have. Someplace you go to airports, you're lucky to find a distinction between recycling bins and non-recyclable bins. San Francisco, they basically have three bins, and they have them throughout the airport. They're color coded, and one of them is for recyclables. One of them is for just trash. It's not recyclable. The other is food waste. And one of the things that they do in the Bay Area, they have businesses, pretty successful businesses, that take the food waste and through a process I won't describe here, but they create a fuel for buses and for trucks and stuff like that. And adversity lies opportunity, but they've got it right. And so I've been intrigued by their success and anxious for us to replicate that in Delaware and other states as well. But in October of 2023, this would be a question, I think, for Secretary Beiser and Ms. Fife Ferris, but in October of last year, the EPA published a report that found that nearly 60% of methane emissions from municipal solid waste landfills actually do come from food waste. And earlier this year, we held, so some will recall, we held an EPW hearing that explored strategies to reduce methane, a greenhouse gas that is, I believe, over 80 times more potent than the carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. But one of the strategies that emerged as a solution at that hearing was waste diversion. And my question, both for Secretary Beiser and for Ms. Fife Ferris, is what efforts are currently underway in your state, in your city, to divert food waste from landfills?
So within Seattle, we have food waste is banned from being put into our garbage, and it has been since 2015. And we have extensive collection opportunities, both at the curbside and then out in the commercial sector. We have robust composting facility opportunities. So we have facilities for processing the material, which is critical. At the state level, though, they just passed a law where they're going to be studying how to better move food waste out of the waste stream, and they're going to be mandating that collection opportunities be available statewide for organic materials, but also supporting the the processing aspect. You can't collect it if you don't have some place to haul it, to process it. And food waste is a local type of, you have to do it within a reasonable distance from where you're doing it. And that's one way to move the food waste. We also have an extensive food rescue program where we're working with our local grocery stores. Our large businesses have big cafeterias, our restaurants, to help move the food out the back door that's edible to the food banks or the rescue organizations that can use that. We're actually entering into a grant program where we're going to be giving money to help come up with innovative ideas on transportation, and we'll be announcing the winners of those grants probably within the next month. And so we've identified different ways, and then we also educate our residents on how we call it, love food, stop waste. And so we educate them on how to make better shopping decisions so that they're not throwing those strawberries out at the end of the week and they actually ate them.
Well, that's a great rundown. That's wonderful. Same question, Secretary Beiser, same question. What is going on in the Tar Heel State you may want to mention to us with respect to diverting food waste from landfills?
We are, in addition to looking at data, so I mentioned earlier, we've been analyzing how much food is being generated, wasted food is generated versus our commercial composting capacity. It's a 2.1 million ton gap, so we're working with the industry to look at options there. We are also, we have a Use the Food NC campaign that we are doing an educational campaign statewide along the lines of what Ms. Fife-Ferris was just discussing, trying to help folks understand both how to save money. I believe that the number is about $1,500 per year that the average family wastes in food that they buy but never eat, but also how to keep it out of landfills. We also have been convening our food hubs and food banks to look at how we can better help support them in the food rescue, because of course we want the first priority for rescued food to go to feeding people who are hungry or food insecure before we look at other options such as animal feed or composting. There's also been efforts to work with our agricultural industry for providing food for feed at those operations. And then we are also supporting local government programs through a grant program. So recently we gave a grant to a local company called Compost Now that is installing new tipping stations, reinforcing their loading dock and making improvements for their compactors.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, those were encouraging comments. Senator Capito, other questions?
I don't. I just want to thank the panel, and I appreciate everything. And we'll get to work. Help us on the House side to get these bills across the finish line. That would be a good takeaway for today.
The Senate is about to start our first vote. In fact, I think we've just started our first vote. And Senator Capito may feel a need to run and vote. I want to just take another minute or two and ask a couple of questions. But before you head out, again, from my heart, thank you for believing in these issues, leading in these issues. And somehow we have to figure out how to get the ball into the end zone in the House of Representatives. And it's not something that either of us can do by ourselves, either part of it by itself, but we got to get this done. There's a lot at stake here, and great opportunities as well. And we look forward to doing that. When I first became governor of Delaware, an old governor, much older governor, came to see me. I was just a pup at the time. He came to see me, and he said over lunch at the governor's house, he said, "Governor Tom, here's one piece of advice for you." I said, "What is that?" And he said, "The main thing is to keep the main thing, the main thing." And I said, "The what?" The main thing is to keep the main thing, the main thing. And here, in terms of moving this legislation and putting it on the president's desk, we got to get it through the House. And that's something that is going to take every bit of our efforts and with our colleagues together. So we look forward to that. And I'll see you on the floor. Okay, thank you. And thanks for great work here. I have maybe at least one more question on reuse. I'm going to ask Ms. Ferris this question, if I could. I think in your written testimony, you mentioned a public-private partnership that was established between Seattle Public Utilities and local businesses called, I think it's called Reuse Seattle. This program has supported the promotion of reusable food service ware as an alternative to single-use containers in places like entertainment venues and places like restaurants. Maybe it includes public schools and that sort of thing throughout the city. Would you just describe for us some of the successes of the program? How has the city been able to drive business and individuals to this program? Make sure you're, there you go.
So we started the program by getting people together who were stakeholders and getting them all interested, and that started to attract interest from reusable product vendors. And then we worked closely with our stadiums, like our large stadiums, Climate Pledge Arena, where the Mariners, Lumen Field, where our Seahawks play. We've also worked with our movie theaters, closed venues, a lot of our music venues and festivals with their actual people who plan these event planners, and we just made connections. And we aren't actually doing the work. We're not funding the work. We're funding a person to bring people together. But then we've also helped them with siting a wash facility. And then we've been working closely with PR3 on standardization. And now, as of the last count, we've, through our activities that have gone on, the actual events, we've resulted in displacing over 1 million single-use items with reusables. But standards are really critical so that you have a cup that people won't take as a souvenir and they'll put in the bin. You've got to have bins. But our vision is that this goes citywide and that we work with fast food locations and that we have drop-off locations around the city, and the city will help with that are similar to like your library books, and you put in, and you'll have a QR code or you'll have a barcode, and it will go into that, it will go to a wash station, and then it'll be scanned, and then it will be redistributed. So that's our vision, but right now we're working primarily in the closed loop environments, but very large closed loop environments when you think about like Lumen Stadium and where the Mariners play.
All right. Follow-up question relates to this. And you may, I think in part you answered this, but I'm going to ask it anyway, but what lessons can communities across the country, West Virginia, Delaware, other places, what lessons can the rest of us take from programs like Reuse Seattle?
So I think you have to start small, identify people who are, groups that are really interested, small music venues, small theaters. You start and you pilot and you figure it out what will work, and then you expand it and you look for, there's a lot of people moving into this space, so you can learn from what other people have done and you can put that into play where you are. You don't have to recreate the wheel. And then you look to places like the PR3s and the Markups and others that are really active in this arena, and you look for help from them. And those are all private companies or nonprofits. So the government can convene it, but let the private sector run with it.
Okay, good, thank you. Mr. Marshall, I have one more question. Would you be up to it? Want to give it a shot?
Yeah.
All right. Recycling partnerships feet on the street program is an initiative that provides direct feedback to consumers by tagging residential recycling carts with information about what residents can and cannot put in their recycling bin. This sounds great. Mr. Marshall, what have been some success stories from the Feet on the Street program? And are there other projects that Recycling Partnership is working on to improve recycling in communities across our country?
I'm so glad you asked. The Feet on the Street program is a strategy that we use, that we've developed over the years to try to get as close to that recycling behavior as possible. So we have people in the field partnering with states and cities around the country, giving feedback, direct feedback to residents, checking out their recycling, talking to residents, and giving them that information on the cards, on those cart tags that you mentioned. One of the most recent and biggest successes we've had is in Smyrna, Delaware. We had a partnership with the Delaware...
Home of the Smyrna Eagles.
Home of the Smyrna Eagles. I was going to say that.
Just north of Dover.
And so the Delaware Waste Authority really wanted to test strategy at the local level to see how we can improve recycling, and they take those learnings to scale across the state. We love that because we take those learnings to scale across the country. And so through this work and through engaging the residents in Smyrna, we saw a 78% reduction in contamination, which might not mean much if you're not in the recycling field. It is a huge reduction.
That's great.
And so we're really proud of that work. Delaware is ready to scale it and replicate it, and we're really ready to do that around the country. And I think you asked for another success story that in communities around the country that we're working in. One connecting to the public-private partnerships that we're discussing, Orange County, Florida is one example I would share where we worked on the same Feet on the Street program throughout the county, improving quality drastically. And what that does is it sends signals to the private sector, and now they're looking to have private sector investment in Orange County and Orlando to build a recycling facility to manage that material.
That's good. The people of Smyrna, I hope they're watching.
Me too.
This is one of the most exciting things that's happened in Smyrna today. This is great. All right, I've come with we're voting, and in the Senate, I think they want me to come and vote, and so I'm going to close it out here. But I just really want to thank you all. I want to thank you for what you do with your lives, for our country, for your states, and I want to thank you certainly for your time, your testimony today. And I want to thank Senator Capito. I want to thank our staffs rather, who have approached this issue really in a truly bipartisan way. And I found a long time ago that bipartisan solutions are lasting solutions, and that's the way we approach things around here. But your perspectives help us appreciate that although there are significant challenges relating to our waste, there are opportunities for us to do better. I believe the federal government can and should work with state and local governments as well as nonprofits and the private sector to help us build a circular economy and more sustainable future for our nation, for our kids and our grandchildren. I look forward to our continued work together to protect our one and only planet. For some final housekeeping, I ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a variety of materials that relate to today's hearing, including letters from stakeholders. Senators will be allowed to submit questions for the record through the close of business on June 5th. We'll compile those questions and send them to you, to our witnesses, and I'm going to ask that you try to respond by June 20th. And this is my favorite part of when I get to the end of the hearing. My other colleagues have left to go vote, and I can ask unanimous consent, and nobody can object because they're all gone. I get to serve in the Senate for another 7 months or so, and people say to me almost every day, the people are very nice. They say to me almost every day, "I hope you're enjoying your." Retirement. I say, I'm not retired. And I have no intention of, frankly, I don't have any intention to ever retire, but God willing. But we've got plenty of work to do in this committee and in the Senate and the House. Because we have to somehow figure out how to thread the needle over in the House on recycling, the recycling legislation. We've, I think, done good work here. And it's not probably perfect. We can certainly, everything we do, I know we can do better. We look forward to working with Democrats and with Republicans and the administration till we can finally get the ball into the end zone. And just turn around and say to our staffs, is there anything else that we're missing here? With that, it's a wrap. With that, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you all very much. God bless.